Hello, listeners. As you are probably aware, my book, Podcasting for Business: How to Create a Show That Makes a Bottom Line Difference for Your Company, is going to be officially released on September 10th. So, to give everyone a deep dive into exactly what the book contains and how it can be used to improve your podcasting investment, I got together with Tom Fox of the Compliance Podcast Network to record a 10-episode mini-series on exactly that. It's all releasing on the Compliance Podcast Network. You'll find a link in the show notes. And I'm also going to be releasing one episode here on the company show every day until launch. I know you'll enjoy it. And if you want to get a copy of the book, you can do so at podcastingforbusiness.com/book.
This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to an exciting new podcast entitled Podcasting for Business, the Book. In this podcast, we will explore the powerful intersection of podcasting and business growth. In this exploration, I'm joined by one of the business podcast industry's top experts, Megan Dougherty, to discuss her game-changing book, Podcasting for Business. Whether you're a podcasting pro or just starting out, this podcast and Megan's book will be your go-to resource for turning your passion for podcasting into a powerful business tool. In this series, we'll take a look at the reason Megan wrote this book, the role of a podcast for a business, and why your podcast blueprint acts as your prime directive. We look at the value math of podcasts and take a deep dive into the 15 metrics Megan suggests you consider using. We look at combining blueprints and metrics moving forward for your podcast. We say some words on recording and post-production, sound and audio quality, and then putting it all together. But don't take my word for it. Listen to Megan Dougherty on why you should listen to this podcast, and more importantly, buy her book, Podcasting for Business. Megan, give me 3 reasons why a listener should buy and read this book.
Because number 1, there actually is a formula for profitable podcasting. 2, it's all in the book, Podcasting for Business. And 3, any business can take this information and apply it and start seeing a better return on their podcasting investment.
Podcasting for Business, the book, is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. In this episode 1, we talk about Megan's role in the world of podcasting, and particularly business podcasting, why she wrote this book, and its power for you. Hello, everyone. Tom Fox back with Megan Dougherty. We're going to go in a different direction today because Megan has written a book, and that is The Business for Podcasting, the book. And this is our first episode, so I get to ask Megan questions about being a writer as opposed to questions about being a podcaster or an editor. Megan, I'm very excited for you. Obviously, I've read the book, and I found it incredibly useful and incredibly helpful. But why did you write this book?
I wrote this book because I and my team at One Stone Creative, we've been talking about adding kind of systematization and rigor and more measurement to help businesses figure out the value that their podcast is actually generating for years. And over the time, we developed these really good methodologies, great frameworks, great systems. And there were bits of it here and bits of it there and bits of it in other places and bits of it in our own systems and the work we did with clients, all very useful. But I wanted to get something that was all together, that could be a reference guide, that would help anyone who wants to podcast for their business do so really efficiently and effectively. And a book seemed like a really good way to do that because it is a lot of information. It is fairly complex, and having it in all in one place that can be easily referred to seemed like the best way to really present the information. And it's kind of cool to have a book.
It's very cool to have a book. You said the why of writing it, but why now? Did you just have the information together? Did you have enough clients that you thought it would be helpful to them? Is it a thought leadership positioning? Is it all of the above, or perhaps none of the above?
It's most of the above. But I think that the big one that you didn't mention is that we've done enough work with this now that I'm really sure about it. Over the last couple of years, we've been developing these ideas, we've been developing this framework, but now we've seen it in practice enough and been able to reverse engineer it and see it in other podcasts, even those that we're not involved in, and see these kind of theories working, that I feel really confident in the information and the fact that when, somebody gets this book and they start applying it, they're going to see results. So part of it was kind of the confidence in the methodology that I'm teaching in it. It felt like now is a really good time to do that, especially when I met a fantastic book coach towards the beginning of the year. So everything just kind of fell into place.
Who did you write it for, Megan?
I wrote it for the lawyers, the business consultants, the HR people, the insurance folks, anyone who is running a business that is thinking about podcasting as a marketing channel. It's for them to help design a show and then track it over time to see how much difference it can make in their business.
Megan, I wrote down that you started podcasting or in the podcast world around 2017, and I can't remember if that date is correct or not. But if it's not, could you tell us when you started? But it really leads into what are some of the biggest changes you've seen around podcasting for businesses over the past X number of years?
Yeah, you got it right. It was 2017. That's when Audra called me up out of the blue and we started One Stone Creative. And back pre-pandemic, podcasting was a lot less sophisticated as an industry than it is now. A lot more people are familiar with podcasting. They know how to consume them. A lot of people even know how to create them. And so in the last, say, 7 years, I guess it's been, some of the big changes, there's starting to be a lot more conversation around the different ways that a business can use this. Because back in 2017, it was all about, you start a podcast, you get downloads, you get famous, you make money. But that conversation has changed a lot because one, a lot of people did that and they didn't make a lot of money or get famous. But they're starting to see other kinds of utility in terms of the people that they're able to connect with through a show, the authority that they're building, the opportunities that come about because of the show. And so the podcasting marketplace or industry is a lot more sophisticated. And then, of course, there's been changes. Video is getting more and more popular. AI is doing wild things now, and it's probably going to do even wilder things in the next couple of years. But what's always going to stay the same is the importance of having a really good strategy behind what you're doing.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your writing process. I'm pretty much a morning writing guy because I'm a morning person. Are you a morning person, an evening person? Can you sit down and just write it? What was your writing process up until the point where you sent it to your beta team?
For me, the writing process, it started with creating a really good outline, because for me, sitting down with a blank page is not a super fun experience. So what I did as part of this book coaching process, and I'd like to give a shout out to Amy Collette of Unleash Your Inner Author. She was wonderful. But we worked together and developed an outline that was going to cover the major sections of the book and then what was going to be within each section. And that's where we came up with the metrics rubric, which we'll be getting into in upcoming episodes in this podcast. And having that meant that whenever I did have time, I could just sit down and write a section. And it wasn't as kind of intimidating as having to sit down and figure out what the next chapter is going to be. Mid-afternoon tended to be my really good time after I got sort of the morning's work done, because I, like the people I'm writing for, have jobs and stuff we need to do all day. So the writing had to fit around that. But I've always been a pretty quick writer. I don't know if you know this, Tom. When I was in high school, I was in a literary arts program. And so I've been writing since high school and then writing professionally since about 2010 in various means. So I've got a pretty fast words per minute when it comes to writing this kind of content. And so we were able to do the whole thing in about 10 weeks. With the amendment, some of it is repurposed from other content. So it wasn't 100% unique in 10 weeks.
I always thought you were going to say, in a very Canadian shout out, that's how Malcolm Gladwell writes his books. It's all by outline. Shout out to the Canadian writing process. Actually, let me just ask you about repurposing, because I am a huge believer in everything you do should be repurposed multiple times. And one of those times should be in a book. How did you repurpose previously created information for this book?
A lot of it came in the reference section of the book. That's what we call the reference section, is the how to podcast. Because of course, I've been creating content about how to podcast for 7 years now. And so we were able to go back to old blog posts, old podcast episodes, old email series that we wrote, and think, because what was useful then is useful now. Some of it just needed some updating. So for repurposing, we went again by the outline, figured out which sections we already had content on. And then that became the first draft of what ultimately was the chapter in the book.
So I ask you to take us up to the point of invoking your beta team. I was really intrigued by that. I was lucky enough, or privileged enough actually, to be a part of the beta team. But what was your beta team and how did you use them?
Oh, it was wonderful. So I had a small handful of people who were kind enough to read it after it was in its good first draft format. So not published ready, but good enough that I wasn't embarrassed to show anybody. And so there were about 5 altogether. And I sent the manuscript just in a Word document for people to read and be able to make comments on. And I got such amazing feedback from the people who did that reading. Your notes were great. I had a couple of other readers who would go through and even be like, actually, this is the first time you mentioned this word, you should define it. I feel like I received a wonderful gift in terms of the work people were able to give me and to help me in writing this book. And the final beta reader, I'm enormously privileged to have a spouse who is a former professional copy editor. After I had integrated all the feedback from the first beta team, I was able to send it to my spouse who did the final copy edit, and that made it ready to go.
I have a spouse who's a former professional copy editor, so I know of what you speak.
I did not know we had that in common. That's marvelous.
Yeah, she worked for the Financial Times in London. Yes, extraordinarily helpful. So let me ask you, are you most proud about regarding this book?
It's extremely well organized. I'm proud of the information. I'm proud of the model that we've developed, but just about the book specifically, I'm so incredibly proud that it is an easy to read and easy to use manual or textbook almost on how to podcast efficiently. And so I think I did a pretty good job putting the information into a sequence and organizing it such that it can be taken and used by someone who doesn't have a lot of experience in podcasting.
Megan, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this first episode, but before we leave, I certainly wanted to ask you, when will the book go on sale? Can listeners pre-order it now? And where would they go to do so? And wherever that is, we're going to link to that in the show notes.
Yes, it is currently available for pre-order at the time of this listening. It's at podcastingforbbusiness.com/book. It's on pre-order until September 10th when it officially releases, and all up until launch, and then the rest of the week of launch. If you do decide to order it, you will get a free ticket to the Podcasting for Business conference, which, as Tom knows, is a very cool event that happens in November.
That is very cool. And Megan, thanks so much. I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Me too, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Podcasting for Business, the book. I hope you will check out Megan's book. We've linked to the resource in the show notes. You can pre-order it now. I would encourage you to do so and also attend her virtual Podcasting for Business conference, which will be held in May. I hope you will join us for our next episode where we take up the role of a podcast in a business and how a podcast blueprint is your prime directive for your podcast going forward. This podcast is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.